Today's Cloudcast is sponsored by MongoDB. As a software engineer, chances are you've crossed paths with MongoDB at some point, whether you're building an app for millions of users or just figuring out a side hustle or a new project. As the most popular non-relational database, MongoDB is intuitive and incredibly easy for development teams to use. Now, with MongoDB Atlas, you can take advantage of MongoDB's flexible document data model as a fully automated cloud service. MongoDB Atlas handles all the costly database operations and admin tasks that you'd rather not spend time on, like security, high availability, data recovery, monitoring, and elastic scaling. So go try MongoDB Atlas today. You can visit mongodb.com/cloudcast to learn more.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Good to be back with everybody. Good to be moving along in the year, getting from spring to summer, and let's jump right into the cloud news of the week. You know, there's been a lot of things that we try and track. A lot of times we'll talk about VC funding, we'll talk about companies funding, some new technology coming out. And a lot of times those are technology company-centric, or sort of what we think about as compute-centric types of companies or technology-centric companies. But what we've been seeing more and more are these trends where companies that you know, whether they're in banking or healthcare or automotive or whatever it might be, are really becoming technology companies, and we're seeing intersections between them and the cloud computing technology that we've covered in this show for years. So there was a number of articles this week that I thought were sort of interesting and connected a few different dots and sort of a trend to watch, especially if you're interested in edge computing, IoT, autonomous driving, those types of things. There were really three articles, and they were somewhat related, some this week, some from a couple of weeks ago. The first one was that Ford made an announcement of a $500 million investment in a company called Rivian. Rivian is a electric vehicle startup, sort of rivaling Tesla. They're focused more on SUVs and trucks as opposed to the sedans that Tesla's been focused on. But Ford made a $500 million investment in this company. So really, kind of showcasing where the automotive industry is going in terms of trying to figure out how do they transition from either hybrid vehicles or gasoline-powered vehicles towards more electric, but also getting into autonomous driving, getting into ride sharing. So big investment from Ford into this startup. The second one that sort of came out of that research that I saw was that Amazon, about a month ago or so, it was announced they led a $700 million investment into Rivian. So it didn't necessarily explicitly say how much Amazon, the company, had made as far as this investment, but they were one of the lead investors of things going on. So a bunch of money going into the electric vehicle space, which will be the autonomous driving space, which has all sorts of ramifications as to, impacting ride sharing, impacting, larger vehicles, say trucks and so forth down the road. So a lot going on in that space, and to see these big investments, rivaling what we're seeing, VC investments into, technology companies. And then the third one that kind of connected the dots was that Ford is partnering with Amazon to build out cloud services for connected cars. And they were working together with a company called Autonomic, which is a number of people, former Pivotal, former Greenplum people had started a company called Autonomic, really building out kind of a cloud specific for the auto industry, for edge devices and connected things around automotive. So interesting to watch all of these things sort of play out. We've been talking for a number of years about edge, about IoT, about artificial intelligence. But a lot of times we were talking about them just from a technology perspective. It is beginning to be very, very interesting to see these become materialized with large investments from the companies that, very likely you'll interact with, both from a consumer perspective, so for vehicles or ride sharing, but also obviously from a technology perspective with companies like Amazon and AWS. So it's sort of interesting to watch all of those dots start to get connected. We're going to try and dig into that more on the show later on this year. We're going to try and get some of those companies on the show and really want to talk about the types of things that they're doing. So thought those were all sort of interesting pieces for the cloud news of the week. A couple of other little things that made some news this week. Apple made some people from CNBC dug into Apple's earnings and their spend. Noticed that Apple's spending $30 million a month with Amazon, with AWS. So I think we're going to see more and more of these types of announcements coming out where large companies are talking about their spend in the public cloud. People initially sort of freak out about it because when you talk about things in the millions and they compare that to their own sort of spending. Sometimes those seem like bigger numbers. Usually when we look at them in the deeper context, and we'll dig into this with people like Corey Quinn and others who really look at cloud spend, these end up becoming very much in line with what people spend on technology, 1%, 2% of revenue types of things like that. So I think we will see more of these headlines in the future. We've seen this from Pinterest and from Lyft and some other companies, Uber, about what their spend is or what their promised spend is with cloud providers. But again, we always have to sort of put these in context in terms of revenues that they generate and really how much does this vary from where they have spent maybe on IT in the past. The last one I thought was sort of interesting, and I cover some of the Kubernetes space on the PodCTL podcast as well. Big announcement from Tinder. So if you're worried about hooking up or your love life and you're using Tinder, just know on the back end, Tinder has been using Kubernetes now for the last couple of years. They've been transitioning to Kubernetes. So, Kubernetes, if people wonder, does anybody have a Kubernetes problem? Well, if you're interested in love or hooking up or anything involving Tinders, you do have a Kubernetes problem. You want to make sure that their Kubernetes is working so that when you swipe left or swipe right, you're going to get the partner that you're looking for. So with that, we're going to wrap up Cloud News of the Week. I always want to thank our sponsors for the show. And with that, we're going to get to a very interesting interview with Dr. Steve Herrod, who former CTO of VMware and now managing director at General Catalyst Venture Capital. Today's sponsor is Datadog. Now, we've been talking about Datadog for a while now. It's the monitoring platform for cloud scale infrastructure and applications. But did you know that Datadog seamlessly integrates with your AWS environments? So you can start monitoring EC2, RDS, ECS, and all your other AWS services in minutes. You can visualize key metrics, set alerts to identify anomalies, and collaborate with your team to troubleshoot and fix issues fast. So if you want to figure out how Datadog can help your AWS environment, try it yourself for free by starting a free 14-day trial today. If you go to datadog.com/cloudcast, not only can you start your free 14-day trial, but you get a free Datadog t-shirt. So go out to datadog.com/cloudcast, sign up for your free 14-day trial, start monitoring your AWS environment, and get your free t-shirt. And now, on to the show. And we're back. And, folks, one of the things that we've been very privileged over the years as we've had a chance to talk to a lot of startup companies is from time to time, we also get to know some of the venture capital folks that work in this space and enable those. And then obviously we've had a chance to meet a lot of very good people over the years. And so tonight we're very, very excited to have an old friend of the show, but also somebody who, continues to sort of amaze us at the breadth of the things that he works on and the kind of the level of kind of sophistication that he brings to this industry, and really one of everybody's favorite people in the industry. So very, very excited to have Dr. Steve Herrod, Managing Director from General Catalyst. Good to have you back. It's been a little while since we've spoken, and how have you been?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I still have troubles introducing myself as a venture capitalist. I still think I'm sort of technologist doing investing. But things are great. Yeah,
no, that's good. I know, obviously, if folks have followed the show for a long time, or if you've been around the IT industry, obviously a lot of you would have known Steve from his days as CTO at VMware. I looked, it's been 6 years since you made that transition from, really helping to shape the virtualization industry, the infrastructure industry on the vendor side to moving over. Just for folks that are kind of curious about how that transition works, what have the last 4 or 5 years look like, and maybe what are some of the big lessons you've learned as you've transitioned from one side of the industry to another?
Yeah, I'm pretty nerdy about analyzing all kinds of stuff, and so when I was thinking about, I was at VMware for about 13 years, and I actually got a spreadsheet in front of me, and I wrote down the things I really love about my job, which included things like working with technologists, trying to figure out the future, that sort of thing. And I got to things that I didn't like so much, which was like constant travel and budget meetings and stuff like that.
Yep.
So then I was like, hey, I wonder what job lets me do all the things on the left-hand side of the spreadsheet and less of the things on the right-hand side. And sort of ended up finding that investing would be a great way to do that. But I definitely spent a lot of time talking to people interested in the investing world and wondering what it's like. And I just sort of summarize it as, it can be kind of what you make it. And I've really enjoyed the learning side of it and working with incredible people. But you do miss being part of a company sometimes too. So there's always trade-offs.
Right. Obviously one of the things that you had to do when you were at VMware, VMware went through a lot of changes. One of your responsibilities was obviously building a technology portfolio. So you had to look at, what was there today, where was the future going to be, how did you either build or acquire things that would kind of fill in the portfolio. I have to imagine it's a little bit different when you look at your portfolio companies. You're not necessarily trying to piece them all together because they're all independent. Like, how do you kind of think about that? Because I would guess to some extent there's sometimes technology overlap and sometimes, very different areas that you've got to go learn in. Like, how has that mindset sort of changed for you?
No, great question. And it's something I've been, really learning as you went forward. There are probably a couple things of relevance that come up. I think the first of all is, you pick a company based usually on what is the space they're working in. Is it a big space? Is it a growing space? Then you pick it on certainly the people, like do they have the chops and the interest in going along and doing disruptive big things? And then the last one is they have some idea or some product and how differentiated is that within the space? And those are kind of the three things you're always evaluating. The backdrop of all that, though, is, at the end of the day, you're looking for companies not only that are going to understand how to sell products. I work only in enterprise startups, so they're selling to other companies. But they need to know how to sell the product, but they also need to know how to get tight with other companies and play the partnering game. There's just so many things that to make a great company that grows fast, you have to get into. And so a lot of it is just constantly looking at all of these different pieces of the puzzle and seeing if they come together. And then it needs to couple with something that you're genuinely interested in doing.
Sure.
So there's a whole lot of, as you've probably heard from everyone, we must probably meet 100 companies in depth in a year and invest in kind of 2. So there's just a large vetting process.
Wow. That's a huge number. I imagine, like, I think about it that in our perspective, we do, roughly 50 shows a year. We'd have to basically pick one that we thought was the best one. And then obviously you have to pick that, like, you can't just do it at the end of the year. Timing is important, and, timing of funding, timing of them looking at other people. So that's an interesting narrowing process. I'm sure that's just a lot of cycles to go through really, really fast.
It's really fascinating. It's always the backdrop too, is that it's a very competitive world on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in addition to all of that, you're looking for a personal fit and someone you want to work for 10 years with, and you want to have the time to get to know each other. And yet there's all these other investors circling around usually too, with where speed becomes important. So it's a really over-constrained problem, but
right.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, exactly. As I look at the portfolio of companies you have right now, and like you said, I think you said this even when you first got into the venture space. You said, I really love the enterprise space. I'm not necessarily looking to go off and do consumer stuff or things outside of technology. You've always been pretty true to believing the enterprise space is not only interesting, but there's lots of opportunities. When I look at your portfolio companies, there seems to be sort of two threads that run through them. One of them is a lot of them are, I would say, sort of front door. You look at them as security companies. They perceive themselves as security companies. But I have to imagine there's also a thread because of how complicated and fast moving the attacks in security are, that there has to be sort of an AI element or a machine learning element behind that. Is that somewhat, is that a fair way to look at kind of where you see things in terms of, security and AI and ML have all sort of become intertwined because of the level of threats and attacks and volume of what's coming at enterprise companies? That's
a good part of it. Maybe I'll step back a little bit. I got into this world, certainly clouded by the VMware and sort of public cloud world and looking what was going. And as I thought about it, everyone has different thoughts, and every company may end up with some different mix of what's running in Amazon or Google or Microsoft and what they're running themselves. And so what I wanted to do, first of all, was pick categories that I thought were going to work across whatever mix. And so that's how I ended up on cybersecurity. If you couple it with clearly a growing problem and one that's getting more attention at the board level, it has become one of the few areas of infrastructure that is getting an increased budget each year. So that was sort of it was a very conscious thought that cybersecurity would be interesting. But then to your point, it's also happens to be one of the most fascinating technology areas, and one that really, if you're trying to outwit the really sharp people, you need to do really interesting technology challenges. And so the availability of massive resources through the cloud, machine learning and forms of AI, all these things have made it just a real fascinating area from a technology capability standpoint as well. And so, yes, they definitely have overlapped and come together. But at the end of the day, we can maybe talk about AI because it is what every startup says they're doing now. It has to be real, and it's a means to an end. It has to provide some result that's so much better than if you weren't using it.
Yeah, I'm curious. I think we would sort of profess to not be by any means experts. We're always trying to figure it out. We're always trying to have it make sense to us. And to a certain extent, when we talk to different people in the AI space, occasionally they'll say, look, AI is this thing that the goalposts are always moving because the things that seemed complicated 5 or 6 years ago, once they kind of get it right and it disappears in terms of, it could be auto filling something or giving you a recommendation. How do you think about what are some of the lenses that you look at AI from, especially given that you've got to be looking out, multiple years to say, okay, are we making investments in things that could be affecting these next sets of problems? How do you kind of frame it in your mind?
Yeah, it's funny. My background actually is kind of interesting here. My dad actually did artificial intelligence for Texas Instruments, of all places, when I was growing up. And at the time, the hottest AI on earth was something called expert systems. Expert systems is really interviewing someone and capturing a set of rules that they have in their head and turning it into software that can kind of follow those rules. I think today we would call that, just another algorithm, or maybe we'd call it, maybe we'd call it RPA or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. But the point, I think you really nailed it. A lot of times, artificial intelligence as a category has been, sort of the boundary of things that are pushing computers to do more human-like things. I think today, when people are talking about AI, 99% of them are talking about machine learning, which is a form of AI, a subset of AI, and even some big portion of that are thinking about deep learning, a subset of that. So today, there are definitely several forms. We look for them. The way I really go about it, I actually have these kind of 5 questions I ask any startup on. It's kind of to find out if they're really doing a form of AI or if they're just using it for marketing.
Yeah,
it's a way to dive in pretty deep and understand it. For me, what really matters is this a solution that benefits from having more data, and do we have a unique access to that data? And then, at the end of the day, can the recommendations or whatever you're using the AI for, can it actually do something substantially better than a more traditional algorithm? And a lot of the times, the answer to the first is no, this is just statistics. Mm-hmm. Or the second one is no, it's just a kind of a cool way of kind of getting to the same result. So I try to really, really understand the core algorithmic aspects of what they're doing and make sure it makes sense.
Yeah. I have to imagine, given the amount of processing that would have to go on, like you said, as you said, in sort of real AI, real processing, does that then shape your thought process on, I would imagine sort of the business model behind this? Because, if you go back to the VMware days, obviously lots of R&D, lots of developers, but ultimately the software was sold to be, essentially on premises, and it didn't need something behind it. It did its job by itself. Now, in order to get that, new value that comes out of AI, there's a bunch of constant processing that goes on. Does that sort of make you have to learn that these people have to deliver things as a SaaS model, or like how does that reshape also then the business model that goes along with it? Because the data always has to be, part of the equation, I would suspect.
Yeah, great points. And thank you for saying on premises. You're one of the few people that gets that right. It's absolutely the case. And, again, they're all different sorts of things. But I think that the availability of the cloud has enabled people to do the heavy processing involved with a lot of the model training and model execution. But so you're right. It's at the core, a lot of what you're thinking about is the data and the data used to train these models. Where is it coming from? Are there privacy concerns? How much processing will it take? All those do factor into the cost of developing your solution. And then ultimately, whether it's a core infrastructure or something else, people are consuming almost everything by subscription services instead of perpetual license a lot of us were used to. And so as a result, the processing of this data and how you deal with it goes directly to the operational costs,
right,
which ultimately goes to your profitability. So it's fascinating. I think that I would say the most surprising aspect of this for a lot of companies is the sensitivity of the data itself and the data custody requirements, the ability in many cases for them not to want to use a cloud because they won't allow that core data to leave their own premises. So it ends up being far more complex than a lot of people think when compared to just traditional software.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm curious how much, we even think about how much things have changed since we started the podcast. Things have changed quite a bit since you've been in the venture space. How much does, to a certain extent, open source, kind of the readily availability of open source and some of these things from the cloud providers becoming open source projects impact the way you think about it? That's obviously got an impact on cost, whether it's cost of development or so forth. And then, the public cloud, like how much has that changed your way of thinking about the calculus of, not only building what you can build, but delivering what you can. I mean, I have to imagine it's radically changed what it is. I say that from my perspective, but maybe it hasn't necessarily.
Well, yeah, I think there are two aspects of it. One is using open source as a company to advance your product and to get it forward. And then the second is business models in the world of open source, of which you're in the middle of the best one there is. I'll talk to the first one. And this has been interesting, even from the time before I got into this world. There have always been these discussions on how both the public cloud as well as open source, and even it may not be open source, but these higher level developer tools that allow you to go really quickly. There's certainly a belief that you could, as a result, start a company a lot faster and a lot cheaper. You've got access to all this stuff that previously you might have had to either license or build yourself. But then you interpose that with anyone who looks at the funding rounds, like they've continued to rise, an early stage investment, it keeps going higher. So it's kind of a little funny how that plays out. But I think there's no question open source has allowed all of these developers not only to use the open source to make their own products go faster or go better, but the secret I've also found is it's just a great way to get trained people. If you need someone who works in some sort of database technology or some sort of user interface technology, we've been able to go and look at open source packages and be able to get pre-trained people very quickly. And so I have seen it just touching on all the different aspects of the system. At the same time, again, we could talk about the open source business model, which you're an expert on. But I think at the end of the day, it's really like what lets you build a product fastest and best. And then kind of everything else has to play out, even if it wasn't open source.
Yeah. Do you have a sort of a thesis or a model in your head as to maybe what the enterprise looks like 3 years from now or 5 years from now in terms of how much continues to remain on premises versus, will be in the cloud, whether it's, using sort of raw AWS Azure type of resources or is, delivered as a SaaS? I mean, have you thought about what that shift looks like or how fast do you think it will accelerate maybe away from on-premises?
Yeah, the good news is, or the bad news, like we had to predict this 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago. And I think everyone thinking about it at the time, this is where the hybrid cloud terminology started. And
sure.
You have a pretty simple model that I think most people, there's nothing too profound in it. I think the older a company is and the more regulated it is, the larger the skew to on-premises. And the newer and the less regulated, it could be 100% in the public cloud. And then I think you see all these very computationally heavy companies that have started in the public cloud and found if they built something more custom to their single app, Facebook's an extreme example, but like things like that they're gonna sort of shift back from one to the other. So I think the top level answer is for mid to big size companies, it's everywhere from 20% on premises to 80% on premises, depending on, again, I think age and regulation power, as well as their ability to run something at scale that can actually be better on the cost front.
Yeah. It makes sense. I want to shift gears a little bit. You obviously have a ton of background in your own personal engineering, but building very strong, very well-known engineering teams. You talked about early on, you have to spend a lot of your time, seeing new companies that come in front of you. But how much do you still get to spend with your portfolio companies? Maybe giving them, mentoring them, giving them advice on how to build great engineering teams, how to recruit great engineers. I mean, the thing that you've got, really a ton of experience and expertise around.
And certainly, the good or the bad news is, I probably self-select for companies that are really obsessed with building out great engineering teams and probably that would like at least some cooperation and help on that. So I end up spending a lot of time on it. I think any venture person, what a lot of people don't get is so much of our time is on recruiting and hiring people for those companies. And so that is a major part of the role. For me, that again, I probably take things a little bit differently. All of these types of companies that I go into, I do probably heavier than a fair amount of venture capitalists, look very much into the technology and the product. And I certainly have a skew towards those solutions that have high IP, that is defensible, that you can charge for, and that takes real brain power to build. And so towards that end, I'm kind of constantly asking, like, how can we be 10 times better than anyone else in this space? And so much that comes down to the engineering talent. So I guess the answer is I probably over-index that versus a lot of folks, but it is where I spend a ton of my time. And candidly, I was mentioning at the start, the thing you do miss sometimes in investing is being part of a team and like really the pride of building things and shipping them. And so I get to live a little vicariously by spending a lot of times with the engineering teams.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. It's you never want to lose certain skills, and there's just certain things that you just love to be a part of, and it kind of just draws it to you. I want to ask you sort of one last question, and I don't want you to necessarily give away any of strategy or things that you're working on, but I know you are just a naturally curious person. I know every time we run into each other, you go, "Hey, what are some of the things that are on your mind or you're thinking about?" Outside of kind of the specific domain that you look at from an investment perspective, are there other technologies right now that you're, maybe you're kind of in the infant, early stages that you're just curious about, that you're kind of trying to read up on the side? Anything that has piqued your interest or curiosity lately?
Yeah, well, even within the enterprise and infrastructure world, I think some of the emerging areas are super fascinating. I've been trying to learn a lot about the quantum computing space. I personally still think we're quite a ways out, but I'm really enjoying thinking through what the future algorithms that map to these chips would look like. And I'm spending a fair amount of time on, I used to be in a semiconductor startup before VMware, and I think it's really cool that building hardware is kind of cool again in the startup world. Lots of chips being built for different aspects of ML, for instance. So I'm enjoying that. But outside of the core infrastructure, I'm getting increasingly obsessed with digital health and just the big breakthroughs that are going on in synthetic biology, all the way through obviously all the personalized medicine and genetics. I think there's a real role for AI to be playing in there. We've, as a firm, invested in a bunch of stuff around that. I love what you can do with enterprise infrastructure, but being able to affect people's health is even the next level of, I think, really interesting. So I spend a lot of time learning about that.
Yeah, very, very cool. Well, I'll ask you one last little thing. We have people that listen to the show that probably have some big ideas, may want to start a company. Obviously, you're getting bombarded all the time with new ideas, but any little tips and tricks that you give to companies that get in front of you, that not to set their idea, but to go, this is the way to present to us. This is the top 3 or 4 things that we really want to know. Like beyond the stuff you said, great founder, super passionate. But any little tips and tricks you might give to somebody that gets a chance to get in front of you or one of your colleagues or something? Yeah,
we all probably think about different things. Mine are pretty simple. One is why are you uniquely both interested and qualified to go after this problem? If you were a CIO addressing this problem in an interesting way, or if you were a developer and the tool sucked, I really look for some natural reason why you have unique insight to a space. Also, building a startup is just hard. So if you don't really love this area, it's hard to wither through everything you're going to have to do. So one is always and I think you should think about this before you start a company anyway. Is this really what I am uniquely set up to do for the next 10 years? And do I want to? And then the other one, this is a real simple question, but I ask at every single meeting, which is, why are you 10 times better than what exists today?
Yeah.
And you need to be 10 times cheaper, faster, more accurate, something. 2 times just isn't interesting.
Right. Steve, it is always good to catch up with you. We thank you so much for the time. I know you've got a very, very busy schedule, but as always, thanks for being a friend of the show. Thanks for making some time with us. And folks, with that, I'm going to wrap it up. I want to thank Steve and for Aaron. Folks, always thanks for listening to the show. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for rating it on iTunes and all the different places that you listen to your podcast. And with that, we're going to wrap it up, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.